The resignation letter was still warm from the printer when Gigi James walked through the front gates of the Shin estate. She didn't know that, of course. She found out 40 minutes later when a pale, trembling woman in a pressed uniform shoved a cardboard box into the arms of a stone-faced security guard, burst into tears loud enough to disturb the koi pond, and speed walked down the driveway like the property was on fire. Gigi stepped aside to let her pass, watched the whole spectacle with one perfectly arched brow raised, then smoothed the front of her caramel-colored silk blouse, adjusted the strap of her bag, and kept walking. She was not deterred. She was also not surprised. The agency had warned her. The previous 3 supervisors lasted an average of 11 weeks. The one before them quit via voicemail. We are legally required to inform you that one candidate simply did not return after lunch. Gigi had listened to all of it, crossed her ankles, and said, "So what's the starting salary?" When they told her, she said, "I'll take it," because Gigi James, born in Nassau, raised in Atlanta, shaped by both the salt air of the Bahamas and the sharp wit of a Southern grandmother who did not play, had never in her 31 years of life backed down from anything that paid well and required her to be excellent. And Gigi was, above all things, excellent. She had a degree in hospitality management, a minor in business administration, 5 years of estate management experience across 2 continents, fluent conversational Korean she taught herself through sheer stubbornness, and the kind of organizational precision that made grown men who ran corporations look disorganized. She was 5'7" in bare feet, and she owned heels. She had the energy of a woman who woke up at 5 a.m. not because she had to, but because the morning belonged to her first. The Shin estate was, she had to admit, extraordinary. It sat behind black iron gates in one of Seoul's most private residential districts, a sprawling property that married traditional Korean architecture with modern interior design in a way that most designers only dreamed of achieving. Curved roof lines swept over clean stone pathways. Interior courtyards held manicured trees that had clearly been tended for decades. The house had 17 rooms, a staff of 14, 3 vehicles, a private gym, a wine cellar, a kitchen that had its own kitchen, and one problem. His name was Shin Jae-ho, 29 years old, sole heir to the Shin Empire, which was, depending on who you asked, either a very successful private investment group or the most well-dressed criminal organization in the country. Gigi had done her research. She had noted the ambiguity. She had decided it was not her business unless someone pointed a gun at her kitchen schedule. And even then, she'd need it in writing. She met him on day 1. He came downstairs at 11:15 in the morning, because apparently time was also something the world owed him, in sweatpants and a wrinkled shirt, holding a phone to his ear, and walked directly through the foyer where Gigi was being briefed by the head housekeeper, Mrs. Park, who was 62 years old and had survived 4 supervisors and was clearly running on prayers and overtime. He didn't acknowledge either of them. He walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, stared into it for 30 seconds, closed it, opened it again, and then called out, in Korean, "Why is there no orange juice?" Mrs. Park flinched. Actually flinched. Gigi turned her head slowly toward the kitchen doorway. "Because," she said in clear, unaccented Korean, "no one ordered it. I'm the new supervisor. I've been here 40 minutes. I'll add it to the list." Silence. Shin Jae-ho walked out of the kitchen and looked at her for the first time. He had the face of someone who had been photographed enough to be permanently aware of his own angles. Sharp jaw, dark eyes. The kind of cheekbones that cost less when they're natural. And he looked at Gigi the way people look at something they weren't expecting to find in a room. He said nothing, just looked. Gigi looked back. Unblinking, relaxed. The way you look at a traffic light. Then he went back upstairs. Mrs. Park exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since 2019. "He's always like that?" Gigi asked. "Worse," Mrs. Park whispered. "Today he's in a good mood." Gigi wrote orange juice at the top of her notepad, underlined it twice, and moved on. By the end of week 1, Gigi had reorganized the staff scheduling system, renegotiated the produce vendor contract, implemented a house communication board that actually got used, and discovered that the reason the East Wing smelled faintly of burnt rubber was because someone had been microwaving their socks. She handled all of it without drama. What she could not handle, what she was actively choosing to handle very deliberately, was Shin Jae-ho. He was, to put it plainly, a walking inconvenience with excellent bone structure. He moved through the house like it was a hotel, and he was a guest who had already decided to leave a bad review. He left lights on in rooms he hadn't entered. He scheduled things verbally and expected the staff to have recorded them telepathically. He sent back food, good food, beautifully prepared food, for reasons that were not reasons. It's fine. I'm just not in the mood. He canceled his own calendar events and blamed the assistant who'd confirmed them. He talked on the phone in the middle of conversations. He was never, in the truest sense of the word, on time for anything that wasn't his idea. And he had the specific talent of walking into any room and immediately making it feel like everyone in it was slightly in the wrong place. The staff, all of whom Gigi had already quietly cataloged by personality, skill set, and stress threshold, had adapted to this by becoming a collective of nervous anticipators. They pre-guessed, pre-prepared, pre-apologized. They moved around him like water around a sharp rock, always bending, always adjusting, always absorbing. Gigi did not pre-anything. It started on a Tuesday, 11 days into her employment. Jae-ho came down at 1 p.m. and announced, to no one in particular but loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear, that lunch wasn't ready. It was, in fact, ready. It had been ready for 20 minutes and was being kept warm with professional care by Chef Byun, who had worked in 3 Michelin-starred restaurants and did not deserve to be spoken about as though he'd forgotten to boil water. Gigi was walking by with a clipboard. She stopped. "Lunch is ready," she said. "Has been since 12:40. He glanced at her. "Then why wasn't I told?" "Because," Gigi said, with the patience of someone who had dealt with worse and survived to tell it at brunch. "You were on a call. With the door closed. We knocked twice. No answer. I should have been interrupted. For lunch." "Yes." Gigi tilted her head. "Mr. Shin, with the greatest professional respect, if a closed door and a phone call doesn't earn you 15 minutes of peace in your own house, then what exactly are you working toward?" He stared at her. She smiled. Warm, bright, completely unbothered. "Lunch is in the dining room. Chef Byun made the braised short rib you like. It would be a shame to let it go cold over a miscommunication about knocking." She clicked her pen. "I'll note that you prefer verbal confirmation regardless of your call status. Should we interrupt all calls? Or only calls under a certain importance level? If the latter, you'll need to give me a scale." She walked away before he could respond. Chef Byun, who had witnessed the whole thing from behind the counter, turned to the prep cook and said nothing, just slowly raised both thumbs. Week 2, the staff started watching. Not obviously. Not in a way that would get anyone in trouble. But there was a collective, unspoken understanding that something different was happening. Because in 11 days, the new supervisor had not flinched. Had not apologized for things that were not her fault. Had not reduced herself to the particular brand of smallness that the house had previously required of everyone who worked in it. And Shin Jae-ho, who had, in the past, broken down supervisors through sheer atmospheric pressure alone, seemed to be recalibrating. He didn't know what to do with her. This became most obvious on the day he tried the look. The look was something the staff had named but never discussed out loud. It was the expression he wore when he wanted someone to feel dismissed. A slow, top-to-bottom assessment followed by a return to whatever he was doing, as though the person had already ceased to matter. It had worked on everyone. It was the social equivalent of a door closing in your face. He deployed it on Gigi one afternoon when she came to him with a scheduling conflict that required his input. He looked up from his desk, looked at her, did the slow assessment, looked back down. Gigi waited exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "I see you're doing the thing. Are we doing the thing right now? Because I genuinely have 4 other things on my list and the thing takes a while, so I'd love to know if we're skipping ahead to the part where you just answer the question." He looked up again. "What thing?" he said. "The look," she said. "The one that's supposed to make me feel like I interrupted something important. It's a good look, very effective. I'm sure it's worked beautifully in the past. But I need to know about Thursday's dinner. 12 guests or 14? Because 12 is a tablecloth situation and 14 means we're pulling the extension. And Chef Byun needs to know by 3 o'clock. Jae-ho stared at her for a long moment. 14, he said. Perfect. She wrote it down. Thank you. Also, your dry cleaning came back. With a missing button on the gray jacket. I've already called the shop and they're sending a replacement. You'll have it by tomorrow. She closed the clipboard. Have a good afternoon. And she left. He sat at his desk for a solid minute after she was gone. Then, because there was no one to see him, he did something he hadn't done in a professional context in a very long time. He laughed, quietly, to himself. A short, startled sound, like something had caught him off guard. He did not examine this. He filed it away. He went back to work. But he thought about it later, which was the problem. The incident that changed the temperature of the entire house happened at the end of week 3. Jae-ho had a guest. A business associate, the kind of associate who arrived in expensive cars and talked in the specific low register of men who considered the world their lobby. The man's name was Choi something, and he had the energy of someone who had never been told his jokes weren't funny. He came through the house with Jae-ho and somewhere in the tour because wealthy people gave tours of their houses the way other people told stories. He noticed Gigi. Gigi was in the hallway near the library, going over a delivery manifest with one of the junior staff. She was in her work clothes. Wide-cut trousers the color of dark chocolate, a crisp white blouse, gold at her ears and wrists, hair pinned up with 2 pieces loose at her temples because she had decided that morning that she deserved both professionalism and personality. Choi said something to Jae-ho in a low voice, then laughed. Gigi didn't hear the words, but she felt the shape of them. She had felt that shape before. She knew its weight. She looked up from her clipboard. Jae-ho was not laughing. He was looking at his associate with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something flat and cold. Say it louder, Jae-ho said. Choi blinked. What? What you just said. Say it where she can hear it. The hallway got very still. Choi looked between Jae-ho and Gigi. He laughed again, nervous now. I was just. She runs this house, Jae-ho said. His voice hadn't changed volume. It was worse for it. Better than anyone I've had in 4 years. You will speak about her accordingly, or you will leave. Those are the options. Choi left 20 minutes later, having suddenly remembered an appointment. Gigi stood in the hallway after they'd gone, looking at the middle distance for a moment. Then she went back to her manifest. She didn't say anything to Jae-ho about it that day. But that evening, when she left his dinner schedule on his desk as she always did, she added a single sticky note at the bottom. Thank you for that. It was noted. He found it at 9 p.m. Read it twice. Stuck it in his desk drawer instead of throwing it away. He also did not examine this. It was the orange situation that went viral among the staff. Not real viral. No one was filming anything in the Shin estate, not unless they had very good health insurance. But the kind of viral that travels in whispers over shared meals in the staff kitchen. The kind where people add details each time they retell it until the story is 80% legend and 100% true in spirit. Here is what happened. Jae-ho had a morning habit of wanting fresh squeezed orange juice. Not store-bought, not from concentrate, not from a machine, fresh. Hand-squeezed. Ready within 15 minutes of him coming downstairs. This was, by itself, not unreasonable. What was unreasonable was that he communicated this preference by making a face at any deviation and saying nothing, leaving the staff to interpret his expressions like they were reading weather patterns. Gigi had researched, standardized, and solved this within her first week. She scheduled the oranges, trained the staff on the squeeze timing, and the system worked perfectly for 17 days. On day 18, Jae-ho came downstairs at 7 a.m. instead of 9. There was no juice, because the oranges weren't prepped until 8:30. He stood at the kitchen island. He looked at the empty counter. He turned to look at whoever was nearest, which happened to be the newest member of the kitchen staff, a 22-year-old named Hyun-woo who had been working at the estate for exactly 9 days and whose eyes went wide as dinner plates. Gigi materialized in the kitchen doorway. She had a gift for this, appearing exactly when she was needed, fully composed, like she'd been waiting just off stage. "You're 2 hours early," she said. "Good morning." "There's no juice," he said. "Correct, because you're 2 hours early. The schedule is built around a 9 a.m. start." Hyun-woo didn't do anything wrong. She said this clearly with Hyun-woo right there, so the boy could hear it. "I'll get the oranges myself." "You don't." Jae-ho started. "I know I don't have to," she said cheerfully, already moving to the refrigerator. "I'm choosing to. While I do that, you could start your morning. Or you could stand there and watch me squeeze oranges, which is your right as someone who pays for the oranges." She pulled out the bag and set it on the counter. "Either way, it's going to take about 8 minutes. There's tea already made." She pointed at the teapot on the counter. He looked at the teapot. He looked at her. He poured himself a cup of tea, and he stood there while she made the juice, in silence, but not bad silence. Hyun-woo, watching from the corner, thought he might faint from the novelty of seeing Shin Jae-ho quietly drink tea while waiting for something. Gigi set the glass in front of him 7 minutes later. "Next time you're up early, just text the house line. Someone's always on shift." He drank the juice, set down the glass. "It's good." "I know." She picked up her clipboard and walked out. Hyun-woo spent the rest of the day telling this story to every person in the building. The staff learned quickly that working under Gigi was a completely different experience from anything that had come before. She was firm in the way that people are firm when they are confident enough not to need volume. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She had a talent for delivering the most devastating corrections in the most reasonable tone, the kind that left you fully understanding what had gone wrong without ever feeling attacked. The staff found this, after some adjustment, to be extraordinary. She also made them feel like people. This was rarer than it should have been, and they all felt it without quite being able to name it. She remembered everyone's names by day 2, not just first names. She knew that Mrs. Park's daughter was finishing nursing school in Busan. She knew Chef Byun had a weekly poker game on Thursdays and planned the kitchen schedule accordingly. She knew that the youngest groundskeeper had bad knees and redistributed his tasks without making it a conversation. She didn't announce these considerations. She just made them. In return, the staff would have walked through fire for her. They would have walked through fire and also reorganized the fire, labeled it, and handed Gigi a report. Jae-ho noticed all of this. He noticed because things started working. Not just adequately working, smoothly working. The house moved with a kind of coordinated, quiet efficiency that made his days structurally easier without him having to ask for anything twice. The irritations that used to greet him daily, the small mismanagements, the things that fell through cracks, simply stopped. He didn't thank her for this. He was still Shin Jae-ho. But he noticed. What he noticed most was that she was the only person in the building who never performed for him. Everyone else, even the ones he genuinely liked, operated with a kind of ambient awareness of his mood. They were thermostats calibrating to his temperature. Gigi was a fixed object. She was exactly herself regardless of whether he was in a bad mood or a good one, whether he walked into a room irritated or not, whether he had the full force of his presence turned up or down. She met every version of him with the same composure. He was discovering deeply irritating, and also something else which he continued not to examine. The roasting escalated naturally. It was almost ecological. It started with small things. He made a comment one afternoon that the floral arrangement in the foyer was overdone. Gigi studied it for a moment. "You're right," she said. "Though I'll be honest, you have 17 rooms, 4 of which are essentially decorative at this point, a closet bigger than most people's living rooms, and 3 cars you rotate based on your mood. The bar for overdone in this household is set very generously. But I'll simplify it." He opened his mouth. She was already writing down. Another time, he walked past the sitting room where Gigi was having a brief lunch. She ate fast, always at odd hours, always while reviewing something. And he said, with the energy of a man who didn't expect to be challenged, "Didn't I see that blouse last week?" The room had 2 other staff members in it. Gigi looked up, looked down at her blouse, looked back at him. "Mr. Shin," she said, with a sweetness that was technically still sweetness, "I have a closet that would make your stylist emotional. What I choose to wear and when is a personal creative decision, not a performance for the household calendar." She tilted her head. "Were you concerned? Or were you just—" She paused. "Noticing?" He said nothing. "Because if you're tracking my outfits," she continued, turning a page in her folder, "I'm flattered, but I'll need that in writing before I submit it to HR." Someone in the corner made a noise that was quickly converted into a cough. Jae-ho pointed at no one in particular and left the room. The big rupture. The one that the staff talked about for weeks. The one that Mrs. Park later described as the day the mountain shook. Happened during a dinner party. Jae-ho was hosting 12 people. Business, not social, though the line in his world was always thin. Gigi had organized the evening with her usual precision. The timing, the menu, the service rotation, the room layout. It was flawless in the planning. What she could not plan for was Jae-ho, 3 glasses into the evening, telling one of his guests, loudly in front of the full table, that the ganjang was the wrong preparation. Not wrong, he used a different word. A dismissive word. A word that translated closely to amateurish. Chef Byun had made that dish. Chef Byun, who had trained for 12 years. Who had wept, literally wept, once when a dish came out exactly as he'd envisioned it because he cared that much. The table was quiet. Gigi was at the edge of the room doing what good supervisors do during events, watching everything at once, being seen only when needed. She heard it. She crossed the room. She leaned down to Jae-ho's level. Her voice was very quiet, quieter than her normal voice. "A word, Mr. Shin. When you have a moment." He looked at her. Something in her face made him put down his glass. He excused himself. They stood in the hallway, her back to the wall, arms folded loosely, his back to the dining room. She said, "I need you to understand something. These people work for a salary, not for the privilege of being spoken about carelessly in front of guests. Chef Byun has prepared food at a level that this dinner party doesn't deserve, frankly, and if you have feedback about the preparation, you give it to me privately and I relay it professionally. That is the system. Not." She gestured toward the dining room with a slight tilt of her chin. "That." Jae-ho was quiet. "I'm not asking you to perform gratitude," she continued. "I'm asking you to be a decent employer. There is a difference. One is theater. The other is basic." He said, "You're talking to me like you're a person who can hear feedback?" "Yes, I am." She straightened. "Because you are. Go enjoy your dinner. I'll check on the kitchen." She walked away. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went back to the dining room. And sometime between the 3rd course and dessert, when Chef Byun brought out the final dish himself, which was unusual and the guest of honor had remarked on it, Jae-ho said. Chef Byun trained under Park Ji-hoon. Everything made in this kitchen is intentional. Small. 2 sentences. But he said it. Chef Byun heard it from the doorway. He went back to the kitchen and told Gigi. Gigi set down her clipboard, closed her eyes for 3 seconds, opened them and said, "Good. Now let's get these dishes cleared." It started raining in Seoul and didn't stop for 11 days. This was notable because it coincided with a 2-week stretch where, for reasons neither of them named, Jae-ho and Gigi were in each other's company more than usual. It began practically. One of the estate's guest wings was being repainted, which compressed the living space and changed the traffic patterns of the house. Gigi was everywhere. Managing the painters, redirecting staff, reorganizing temporary storage, and Jae-ho, who was between high-profile obligations and working from home more than usual, was also everywhere. They kept finding each other. In the kitchen at odd hours. In the hallway outside the study. In the courtyard, which had a covered walkway that made it usable even in rain, and which Gigi had quietly claimed as her thinking spot between 7 and 8 in the morning. He found her there on the 4th rainy day. She was standing under the eave with a coffee cup, looking at the rain hitting the stone, still in her coat because she'd just arrived. She heard him come out and didn't turn around. "This spot taken?" he said. "It's your house," she said. "That's not an answer." She glanced at him. "No, it's not taken." He stood beside her. They watched the rain for a while. This was unusual and they both knew it and neither acknowledged it. "You're from the Bahamas," he said eventually. "Born there. Raised in Atlanta. Does rain feel different here?" She considered this. "It sounds different. Nassau rain is aggressive. Like it has something to prove. This rain..." She looked at the courtyard. "This one is sad. Like it's remembering something." He said nothing for a moment. "You speak Korean like you learned it from someone who was angry when they taught you," he said. She turned her head sharply. Then she saw his mouth was doing something. Not quite a smile, but the outline of one. "Excuse me?" she said with great dignity. "The pronunciation is very precise, like you practiced it, until it stopped sounding wrong. That is literally how learning works. Most people have an accent. I have an accent," she said. "In English. In Korean I decided not to." He actually laughed at this. Not the quiet, startled one from before, a real one. Short but real. Gigi looked at him. It was a good laugh. She filed this information somewhere and moved on. The problem with Shin Jae-ho, she was discovering, was that he was a completely different person when no one was watching. Not a better person necessarily. He was still opinionated and impatient and had the specific blindness that came with having never been told no for the first 20 years of his life. But he was real in a way he wasn't when he had an audience. He had opinions about things that weren't power. He thought Korean cinema had peaked in a specific decade and would defend this at length. He had read, she discovered, an embarrassing amount of fiction for a man who performed indifference so thoroughly. He noticed small things, the angle of afternoon light, the way certain sounds carried in rain, whether a room felt right or slightly off, and these observations, when he voiced them, were unexpectedly precise. She found out he played the piano. Not because he told her, but because she heard it one night from the upper hallway. Something slow and unfinished, the kind of playing that was not for anyone but the player. She stood in the hallway longer than she should have. Then she moved on. What he was discovering about her was happening on a separate but parallel track. He caught her laughing with the staff. A full laugh, head back, completely uninhibited. At something Hyun-woo had said that Jae-ho wasn't close enough to hear. He'd stood at the edge of the courtyard and watched for a moment. There was something in it. The way the whole room changed shape when she was at ease. He'd also watched her handle a genuinely difficult situation. A vendor dispute involving a miscommunication. About a contract clause that could have cost the estate significantly. with a combination of firmness, charm, and strategic patience that had resolved the issue in under an hour. He had business associates who would have handled it worse. He'd found himself twice taking a different route through the house than the most direct one, because the less direct route passed through wherever she happened to be. He hadn't examined this yet, but it was building a case without him. The confession, if it could be called that, happened because of an argument. It was month 3. Things had settled, which in the Shin estate meant they had leveled out to something that functioned and occasionally felt warm. Jae-ho was still difficult. He was probably constitutionally incapable of not being difficult. But the difficulty had changed texture. It was less contemptuous and more like he was looking for reasons to talk to her. Which he was. He knew this. He still hadn't decided what to do about it. The argument started over something practical, it always did in their world, and escalated the way their arguments did, which was not with volume but with precision. He had changed a household arrangement without consulting her, which disrupted 3 interconnected schedules, which required Gigi to spend 2 hours fixing a domino effect that hadn't needed to happen. She came to his office, knocked, entered at his word. "The East Wing arrangement," she said. "I know," he said. "I should have told you." This stopped her for a moment. He'd never opened with that before. "You should have," she said, recalibrating. It affected the staff rotation and the vendor timing. 2 hours of corrections. "I'll tell you in advance next time." "I appreciate that." She had her clipboard. She looked at it. She felt slightly robbed of the argument she'd been building on the walk over. Yes. Thank you. Gigi." He said her name and it landed differently than anything he'd said before, probably because he almost never used her name. He always said Ms. James or nothing. "Sit down." She looked at the chair. She sat down. He was quiet for a moment. He had his elbows on the desk and was looking at his hands in the way of someone choosing words carefully, which was so unlike him that it was almost worrying. "You've been here 3 months, he said. 92 days. He looked up. "Are you counting?" "I count things. It's literally my job." Something moved through his expression. "The last 4 supervisors," he said. "I didn't care if they stayed or left. I noticed when they left because the house stopped working. I didn't," he paused. "It wasn't personal. And now," she said. Her voice was level. She was very good at level. "And now," he said slowly, "I think if you left it would be personal." The room was very quiet. Outside it was still raining. Gigi looked at him for a long time. She had the particular stillness of someone who is processing something important while their face holds steady because it has been trained to. "Jae-ho," she said, the name without the Mr. he noticed. "I need you to be sure about what you're saying, because I don't do halfway. I don't do complicated. I don't do being a variable in someone's otherwise unchanged life. If that's what this is, it's better that it stays professional and we both pretend you just said something reasonable about the staff schedule." "That's not what it is," he said. "Then what is it?" He held her gaze. This was, she'd noticed months ago, something he did when he meant something. He didn't look away. "I want to know who you are outside of this house. I want you to eat dinner with me at a real table and argue about something that doesn't have a clipboard involved. I want..." He stopped. A muscle in his jaw moved. "I don't entirely know what I want, but I know it starts with you not leaving." Gigi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm from the Bahamas. My grandmother made food that tasted like weather. I've been in Seoul for 2 years and I still sometimes smell something that takes me all the way back to a market on a Saturday morning that doesn't exist anymore. I have very high standards for almost everything and I have been told this is a problem and I disagree." She paused. "And I have noticed you more than I intended to. So, he said. "So we should probably start with dinner," she said. "A real one, not one I've organized." "Friday," he said immediately. I'm checking my schedule. Gigi. Friday works, she said, and stood up and tucked her clipboard under her arm and walked out of the office. She made it 3 steps down the hallway before she allowed herself a smile. Small, private, the kind that was hers only. The staff knew before they did. Mrs. Park had figured it out around week 6. Chef Byun around week 8. Hyun-woo, who was 22 and optimistic, had known since the orange juice morning and had been emotionally prepared ever since. When Gigi came into the kitchen that evening and requested, not scheduled, a quiet dinner for 2 on Friday, Chef Byun simply nodded. Any preferences? He asked. Something that tastes like an occasion, she said, but doesn't feel like a performance. He nodded again. He already knew what he'd make. Friday dinner was not the end of anything. It was the particular kind of beginning that 2 very proud people arrive at, slowly, circling, each waiting to see if the other is as real as they seem. Jae-ho was on time. She noted this. He had set the table himself, imperfectly but genuinely. She noted this too. They sat and they ate and they argued about Korean cinema, and she was right and he knew it and argued anyway. And she let him argue because there was something enjoyable about watching a man be wrong with that much conviction. He told her about the first time he'd left Korea, which was not as a child of wealth but as someone running from the weight of what his family name meant, and she told him about Nassau, about the particular quality of growing up between 2 worlds and belonging completely to both of them, about her grandmother's hands and her mother's laugh and the way the ocean in the Bahamas looked at 6 in the morning like it was lit from underneath. He listened. That was the thing she'd suspected and was now confirmed. Shin Jae-ho, when he chose to, listened like it mattered. It was a long dinner. He did not become easy. She would not have wanted him to. He was still, in the months that followed, difficult and impatient and constitutionally convinced that his read on a situation was correct until proven otherwise, and he had to be proven otherwise frequently, and Gigi was very good at proving things. He still left lights on. He still had a complex relationship with punctuality when it was his own schedule on the line. But he stopped speaking about his staff like they were furniture. He started leaving specific notes on the house communication board, not requests but actual acknowledgments. Kitchen team, last night's dinner was exceptional. Good work. Small things. Real ones. He argued with Gigi about everything and she argued back about everything, and neither of them would have survived anything less. The staff watched all of this with the satisfaction of people who had weathered a long, strange season and come out somewhere better than where they'd started. Mrs. Park told her daughter about it over the phone one evening. Her daughter asked if the new supervisor was still there. Yes, said Mrs. Park. She won't be leaving. How do you know? Asked the daughter. Mrs. Park thought about Gigi James, the silk blouses and the clipboard and the way she stood in the morning courtyard with her coffee watching the rain like she was in conversation with it. The laugh that reorganized a room. The particular way she looked at Shin Jae-ho when he said something worth hearing. Like she was filing it away for later, quietly and permanently. Because, said Mrs. Park, she made the house worth staying in. For all of us. And the rain kept falling over Seoul, softer now. And in the covered courtyard 2 cups of coffee sat on the stone ledge and 2 voices spoke low and occasionally laughed. And the koi pond rippled, and the lights in the estate were on. Every single one of them, for the first time in a long time, and nobody minded.
Hello besties, in this story we learned that the right person won't shrink to survive your space. They'll stay exactly who they are until your space has no choice but to grow. Confidence isn't loud. It's the woman who walks into a broken environment and fixes it without losing herself in the process. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe and share.